G'day and welcome to another APAC Tech Talk. Today we have a new individual, someone else with some different experiences and different thoughts. I'll skip, my name's Stefan Gumpert. I'm the host here usually, but today I have with me Preethi, and I will let her introduce herself. Preethi, over to you.
Hi, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank Stefan for inviting me for this tech talk. My name is Preethi Rao. I'm a civil engineer by qualification. I am currently working with Autodesk as a senior technical specialist. I handle the whole of APAC region, and I've got almost 17 years of working experience in the engineering and construction software industry.
Nice. Is there any particular industries that maybe you specialize in, or there's particular passions you may have? I mean, I'm sure you can share with the folks out there, right?
Yeah. So, Stefan, if I see the last 17 years of my career, I started my career working as an estimation engineer. Preferably, I was involved more into, quantification of, building projects in this case. Later on, I worked as a site engineer for bridge infrastructure projects. And after 3 to 4 years of my career, I especially moved into the software industry. And my core forte from the last few years has been always into the plant process and the structural industry, which fascinates me a lot.
Nice. And they're two topics that resonate with me just as nice. Myself coming from the mining industry, we definitely have common alignments. I love it. So, today in the industry, what I see, there is lots of talk and topic, about data. What do you see with regards to data and what its impact, how it's impacting your industries that you cover?
So, Stefan, data is everywhere. And currently, I've seen data in a more unstructured format. And I could say it is more unstructured and unorganized. And it is basically facts which are responsible for, building up your construction projects which are there. But I think the most important piece of the data is how do you extract, valuable information out of that data which is there in the form of important analytics, which could help you in managing your projects more effectively. Now, let me give you an example. Preferably, if you see in the recent years, technology has been adopted in majority of the industrial mega projects which are there in. And data has played a very, very important role. But if you see the colossal amount of data which comes out of these projects are not managed well, which is there. Let me throw you important statistics which comes from FMI. And it says that 95.5% of, let's say, the data which is captured in the engineering and construction industry is ideally unused, which is there in this case. Now, if I compare to the industry which, my core forte remains in, especially, let's say, the data which helps oil and gas companies, this data could actually help them in identifying the potential drilling locations to monitor their pipeline operations as well. Or let's say, if I talk about the utilities sector, in order to monitor their electrical grids, etc. So, implementing data or utilizing the data becomes predominantly very, very important, which is there in this. And the second part is, the companies who are exactly executing this large, industrial projects, they are using data to implement it as a part of their construction processes. So they're mostly involved in data-driven construction processes, either to suffice their end customers' requirement, or to deliver better products which are therein, or to have a greater ROI as a part of their projects.
I definitely concur with what you're saying. If I think about it, part of my history has also been to be involved in fabrication. And the traditional fabrication processes still take that 2D drawing and re-engineer it back into a 3D model to be able to then produce those 2D deliverables for the fab shop. The ironic or silly part is that those flat 2D drawings are generated from a 3D model. So it's like, let's dump all this really intelligent information about valves and tags and weights and densities in material to then dump out a dumb 2D PDF, which someone then has to totally re-engineer. Or even worse, someone has to check that 2D drawing to make sure it's correct, before someone has to reinvent that into another 3D model. Absolutely nuts. So you mentioned that this data is impacting construction. What do you see in that space? How is it impacting construction?
So, Stefan, you come from the fabrication industry and you have seen all sorts of data. So, I need to code over here, and it's like an unstructured form of data is like finding a needle in a haystack. So it's very, very difficult to find that important information which is relevant to your project, which is there in this. Now, as in the recent years, we have seen a lot of technology adoption which is happening and this data, volume of this data coming in an unstructured format from the construction processes. And it has grown exponentially based on the number of large projects which you're handling. The most important challenge is, if you see that the lot of material waste and especially project schedule overruns are preferably the major crisis which we see in the construction industry or the concern areas which are there. And it is predominantly scaling over the time which is there. Now, even in the construction processes, preferably, I've worked as a site engineer, not getting the right version of that data or that particular piece of the drawing, preferably have to execute that particular slab casting the next day, I don't have the relevant right information of the drawing or the version of the drawing which is therein. Or there could be impacted changes which might have happened with respect to that particular document as well, basically. Or because of the data or the drawing not coming on time on the construction side, might have impacted my project overruns as well in this case, basically. So, for example, I want to quote an example as I talked about the project time overruns in this case, data which is used in the construction planning, especially as engineers, we could thrive a lot of analytics from the compiled data or drawings which could have accumulated from these projects which are therein, or referring to our experiences which might have happened through our last project in this case, basically. So we gain a lot of information from it. Now, that particular data, if I give it to a planning engineer, preferably, he could identify the potential data risk which is there in the planning stage, which is therein. Or if I give it to a budgeting guy, preferably he could identify the cost overruns which are therein, basically. And let's say, a project doesn't run by a single person. There are multiple stakeholders who form a part of this project which is therein. And it includes everything coming from design, engineering, and the construction people. Now, you don't want these people to, work in silos, not collaborate, coordinate with each other, which is there.
Of course not.
So your processes are not lean in nature in this case.
So your processes become reactive instead of co-aligned, if you like.
Correct.
I mean, it's interesting because if we think about it, design leads on to construction, and construction ultimately leads into operations. And I guess, every asset, the actual operations phase is probably more important or more predominant than the actual design and construction phase. So how do you see this data leading forward or leading into improving the operations side of things?
So, Stefan, in a lot of industrial projects, if I consider, especially if you consider a power plant, once it is built, the first few years it might be running effectively, but then the operations piece play a major important role, because equipment not maintained well or not having a proper maintenance plan might lead it to an expensive expenditure as a part of your maintaining of your project, which is there basically. So ideally, as I've worked with a lot of organizations who are into industrial projects, managing these asset management activities, they ideally have a small book or a register. They identify an asset through paper documents. They have a calendar maintenance plan. That is only 3 things which they have in basically. Now, let's say a particular equipment doesn't work as per the plan's requirement. Preferably, there has to be plans both on the reactive and the predictive maintenance side, which is there in basically. So you need to have an aggressive plant asset maintenance plan, which needs to be carried on a routine basis, which is there in this. Now, when I'm carrying these maintenance plans, preferably all the stakeholders who are above before the operations guy, coming from the document side, like the drawings aspect, which are there, in the data coming in from the coordination stakeholders, because these documents can provide me a lot of information about that particular pump. Even an operation maintenance plan or an installation manual of that equipment plays a very, very important aspect for that asset, which is there in this. And the other part is like, in order for the maintenance plan to work more effectively, the data should be more accurate. It should not be haphazardly live in a paper format, which cannot be used for future consumption, which is there. It should be, accessible anytime, anywhere, wherever I am sitting, in order to maintain that plan as well, basically. And there are certain aspects like you need to, able to predict the performance of that particular plant, which is there in basically. So let's say if the plant is not maintained, it won't give you the expected performance which you want from that particular project as well in basically. And the last aspect is a plant being maintained properly. That means it gives you higher production levels, which are there basically. So you need to put your team in place to maintain those assets, to see to it that the assets are working effectively. And there is a reduction in the time. So there is not too much of backlogs or a time taken in for operating a particular equipment, which is there. And there should be these superfluous form of communication diverging in between the different stakeholders of that plant operations piece, which is there. Whether it is communicating through meetings, emails, phone calls, etc. So somewhere it needs to be collated and recorded properly in conversion to the project which you're handling in this.
Wow, that's a lot of information to digest at once. I have so many questions. Look, and ideas and thoughts here. I mean, look, I totally agree with you. I mean, the fact that these design models that are utilized during the construction phase, and I'll simplify it a little bit, right, from my perspective, knowing how many tons of steel are in a platform, knowing how many valves, elbows, T's, how many linear meters of certain diameter pipe exist in a plant, is all data that exists freely without effort in those design models, is somewhat utilized in those downstream processes, but can be helped in the operations phase a whole lot more. I get it. You mentioned something that actually pricked my ears a little bit. You talked about the management and storage of that data, which brings me to another topic that, look, I'll be honest, it's one of my topics that I do like to talk about a lot. A CDE, or a common data environment, as it's known in the public. I mean, how do you see the CDE or a CDE impacting the construction side of things, but also, maybe looking at the design process and or operations?
So, Stefan, based on experience, I've worked with many of these projects, and I have to actually divide it into different phases as to how the CDE could affect the different parts of the project which is there basically. Now, if I consider a planned project, the data starts exactly coming in from my tendering stage in this case. And when I consider my tendering stage, the capacity of the plant which I need to build in the production capacity which could be taken out from that particular plant to the design documents which are there in basically. Now, these are in different shapes and forms and different formats which are there. So CDE should be something which is more digitally available, more transparent in nature, and it could give information when and where required to that stakeholder of that particular design which is there. Now, let's say I'm talking about a data like a P&ID information coming in from a process guy which is there. Now, P&ID is not just a drawing. It comprises of a lot of attribute information about a particular equipment, about a particular pipeline, preferably in this case. Now, while I'm going to the modeling stage, preferably where I'm generating the documents, which could be in the form of the layout of the plant, the isometrics of the plant, or a report which is generated in this case, basically, it should be something which needs to be captured from the P&ID stage and then added to the modeling stage, basically. Now, when these two different disciplines are working together, there shouldn't be data duplicacy. It should be streamlining or capturing the same data to your next process, which is there, basically.
Totally. Totally agree with you. Totally. I love this. I want to hear more. Don't stop. Just tell me more.
Yeah. So when I'm taking this attribute information, preferably when I talked about this pipeline aspect, and I'm talking about a pipeline which is supplying water to the city, preferably, you need information about the size of the pipe. The operations guy needs to know when he needs to maintain that pipe, preferably in this case, basically. Let's say there is a drop down in the pressure. He needs to identify where there is a pressure drop down. Now, how does he identify? Preferably, it could be in the form of documents. And let's say it's all in paper formats and not managed properly and inaccurate. Preferably, he will not be able to conduct a right maintenance activity for that as well. The next piece is, I directly jumped onto operations. I would talk about a division which comes before that for constructing or erecting those lines in this case, basically. And when I'm talking about it, preferably plant projects comprises of multiple amount of plant and structural data, and preferably not receiving right documents at the right time might affect your progress of completing that project in this case. And also not getting the right version of the drawing might delay the project and also impact the cost and the production overruns which are there in this thing. So it's very, very important that you implement a proper common data environment strategy to implement your project, and see to it that all the stakeholders are responsible for implementing that particular platform in order to ensure a smooth project delivery, and also seeing to it how that could be taken into the last stage of maintaining that particular plant site as well in this. So it's very, very important to implement a right common data environment or technology as a part of your project.
So you could so the common data environment is obviously very applicable to the design space, and many of our designers that are using our software today are using a common data environment. It makes sense. But what you're telling me, from what I can understand, recording testing procedures or commissioning documents as part of that construction/installation process all gets captured in that CDE, which then helps make those decisions on those downstream processes as well. Is that correct, as for my understanding?
Your understanding is completely correct, Stefan. Preferably, whenever you're installing equipments on the plant site, these elements are actually predefined as per the capacity of that plant. And these information ideally come during the construction stage, which is there. But what happens ideally is, like, if you see our construction processes, these are more paper driven. So these documents, like the installation manuals, the warranty documents which are there, these are lying somewhere in the site, which are not documented digitally. And if these are documented digitally and available in a right format, the operations guy can take a large advantage of it, preferably in this case. Like, a lot of equipments might be on guarantees and warranties, preferably, that, the manufacturer is entitled to maintain that particular pump or equipment. But let's say that document doesn't reach the operation guy. He doesn't know, when to call up that particular manufacturer and get a maintenance done for it. Or he might react when there is a sudden breakdown in the plant operations and then take up an action which is there. So meanwhile, I'm losing my production time, I'm losing my labor efforts, etc., while doing the operations of the plant.
Sure, for sure. I mean, this sounds like we can even capture the as-built information in this environment and feed that information back to then capture the potential changes that happen out on site. As we know, it doesn't always get built as the original design intended for whatever reason, unavailability of product or whatnot. But it sounds like a CDE is as literally just capturing everything from design through to construction, and then potentially could be used in that operations phase as well. Who should own this common data environment?
Ideally, it's basically the owner and operator, who is the main stakeholder of that project, should ideally take a decision on implementing a common data environment in the very, very initial stages of the project. Once that's implemented, preferably it is the other stakeholders or the external agencies who form a part of that project needs to implement it as per the owner-operator's decision.
Nice. Look, I think we can probably talk all day long around these topics. You clearly have a passion for these particular topics, just as my conversationalists that were here prior to me. Preethi, I do want to thank you for coming along and sharing your thoughts today. Any closing remarks before I close it out?
First of all, I want to thank everybody for hearing me, and whatever I spoke about, preferably if you've got any questions, you want to talk to me, please reach out to me on my email ID, preferably mentioned in the end of this video.
Awesome. Okay, as per usual, details about us, LinkedIn, emails, all those will be shared on the tail end of this video. Feel free to reach out to your local Autodesk Tech. We can take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.